What is your can't eat at everybody's house horror story? Told my dad my sandwich tasted like fly spray at my grandma's house. He didn't believe me. 2 days later, I catch my grandma spraying the benches clean with the fly spray you find at the cheap store. Dad figured it was safe to make sandwiches straight on the countertop because they looked clean. I dragged him over to see and he apologized and took my sister and I for fish and chips for lunch. My crackpot aunt served us a lovely tray of deviled eggs, complete with very old paprika sprinkled on top. So old, in fact, the many weevils mixed in it were dead. I visited a friend's house who was living with his mother. She asked if I wanted a coffee and I said I would. Upon getting to the bottom of the cup and taking the last few gulps I found there was a used bandaid stuck to the bottom. Never ate or drank there again. I was babysitting a kid in a pretty dirty house. I was told to wake him up, supervise bathing and changing clothes, and feed him. I was welcome to whatever was in the fridge. Okay. The house and his clothes were filthy. Then, when I opened the cabinets, floods of roaches poured out. There were roaches in every opened box and container. I took him back to my house and returned him later that day. I hope the boy ended up in a better situation. I found out CPS got involved shortly after. I was gonna complain about raisins in the potato salad, but the other comments on here are scary. OMG. My MIL fished around in the green bin, compost bin, with her bare hands, didn't wash them, wiped her garbage juice hands on the tea towel, and then went back to prepping the salad. She also got horrifically offended if I didn't want to eat at her house. Had a Christmas party at work. Someone brought pasta salad. The bowl was full of cat hair. Some hairs in the salad looked like pubic hair. I wanted to throw up immediately. Unfortunately, I'm bad at keeping a poker face. I went to a friend's house after school. He was going to teach a group of us to play D and amp, D. We got there and his house was disgusting. I'm not the neatest person, but the carpet hadn't been vacuumed in forever, clothes were all over the place, and dirty dishes were stacked everywhere. I tried to be polite even though the place reeked, but at some point he was like, "Who wants snacks?" He picked up a bowl that was crusted with stuff, splashed in some water, wiped it with a towel that clearly hadn't been washed that decade, and poured chips into it. Then he asked if we wanted to stay for dinner. We did not. When I was a kid, Christmas Eve was always celebrated at Grandma's. I always got sick afterwards. Like Merry Christmas, you're going to puke now. It wasn't until I was all grown up and helping her out in the last weeks of her life that I learned why. She did not believe in expiration dates on anything. Sleepover in the 5th grade at a friend's house. Her mom made chicken and veggies. I took a bite of chicken and something was off. Flipped it over and the backside was coated in black dog hair. My grandma made me a food phobic from a young age. Whether it was ramen with moss floating on top, or chunky milk in my cereal, it just scarred me for life. Dinner at her house was always a fight. Not eating her food was not an option. I'm not sure why that was the hill she would always choose to die on, because she was an amazing grandma other than this. Expiration dates aren't a thing. If the cheese was moldy, you cut it off. I think living through the Great Depression and raising kids in poverty changed her mindset on food. I mean, obviously she's doing something right because she's 91. She must have the immunity of a superhero. A girl I was interested in at the time had cats. I came to her house one day to pick her up for a date and he had a large sack of rice open in her pantry with the pantry door open. One of the cats hopped out of the sack of rice and she just casually laughed at it like, "Oh, they're always getting into things." Came over the following weekend, that same sack of rice was in the pantry and I could hear one of them tussling around in it again. We stopped dating sometime after that, but any time she offered to cook for me, I immediately pivoted to taking her out to eat instead. My mom tells one about going over to her Aunt Virginia's house. She, her parents, and siblings are sat around the kitchen while Aunt cooks, and my mom cannot figure out why no one else is having any of this incredibly delicious bread that's on the table. She's on her third slice when Aunt steps out to do something else, and my mom is told by her brother to go look in the flour bin. Absolutely filled with miller moth larvae. Aunt Virginia had been losing her eyesight for years. I had to stay at a friend's cousin's house for a few days. I wasn't allowed to stay in my own house due to abuse allegations, and she was nice enough to take me in. The thing is, the house was hoarder level. I slept on the floor, which was covered in clothes and a 3-inch layer of cat hair. I hope it was cat hair. She fed me macaroni and cheese, but I distinctly remember there being green crusts on the noodles and the fork being dirty. Not wanting to be rude, I picked out what noodles I could and claimed I wasn't hungry since I had to leave my home. The milk she offered me the next day was cottage cheese, and I politely phoned another friend to ask if I could sleep on their couch because I was finding bugs on my body. I went with my then fiancé to visit some relatives of his. We arrived at their place to find that they were serving up the leftovers of this noodle dish, pancit, that had been their fare the night before. Now, if you know anything about handling pancit safely, you'd know that it goes rancid real quick in hot weather. I could smell that it had gone off, even from the doorway of the house. One of the older relatives knew this too, and bundled some of us to get McDonald's nearby. Those who insisted on eating the pancit got a bit sick later that day. What a mess. Saw Linda from billing on that show Hoarders. Her kids had her do the show, not realizing she had a very legit career outside of her home. She stopped coming to work. I stopped participating in potlucks. I was working as an interior painter during my college years. This middle-aged man put a container of strawberries in the sink, then proceeded to trim his nose hairs over that same sink with an electric trimmer. He rinsed the strawberries and then offered me some. My in-laws leave food out on the table, and then expect you to eat it until the dish is gone. Like, on Monday lunch might be a pork fried rice. The leftovers stay on the table and you eat more for dinner, then overnight it stays on the table and you eat it for lunch again. They do the same thing with seafood, chicken, any dish, any weather, it's staying on the table. And if for some reason food is left over after 2 days, instead of throwing it out, my in-laws will add it to the new dish they're cooking, e.g. 3-day-old chicken that's been on the table during summer will get added to a stir-fry. My narcissistic mother would fake illnesses and not leave bed for months. There was also a portable toilet next to the bed. She hadn't showered in months and has highly questionable hygiene habits. Last Christmas, my now husband and I were visiting, and she said she made the meatballs. I brushed it off, because she's highly delusional and typically my dad cooked anyways. Turns out my dad brought her the raw hamburger and supplies to make the meatballs in bed to make her feel better. She made the meatballs with her dirty hands next to the portable toilet. I found this out months later. We are now no contact for other reasons. But I am thankful my husband and I will never risk eating her sketchy meatballs again. This is a family story. It happened when I was a baby, so no memory. It was a family Thanksgiving potluck style. Everyone brought one dish, plus a drink to share. One of my aunts by marriage brought mashed potatoes. She let it slip that while cooking she ran out of milk. So instead of having her husband run out to try and get more, she used her own breast milk. No one touched it but her, my uncle, and the older kid. After that it was a rule of thumb, if she made it don't eat it. Mind you, after my grandma died in '07, we haven't had any family holiday get-togethers like that since, so no worry there. Have you ever went over a friend's house to eat and the food just ain't no good? It's more of a comedy than horror. When I was a toddler, we lived near a friend of my mom's whose husband was Mexican. He worked at a local farm and they would often have his co-workers over for dinner. My mom and I were invited over often, and the men used to call me over to each of them and hold out a forkful of food for me to eat, which my mom, once she spoke with her friend to understand, told me I could do. Well, one of the men was used to feeding his kids jalapeno pieces and, not considering that I was raised on a lot of German dishes, thought I could handle it. I could not, and he still got hugs from me, but I never trusted him with feeding me again. Rolling on the floor laughing, rolling on the floor laughing, rolling on the floor laughing. My colleague always brings me food to work. I work in a hair salon, inside of a hair salon, if that makes sense. She owns the main salon, and I have my own small salon. We share an entrance and back room. I always knew she was a bit of a slob, but when I saw she used the same sponges to clean the dishes she served me from to wash counters, hair color bowls, bleach bowls, and sink basins, I couldn't do it anymore. The thought of eating from something with bleach, ammonia, hair color, counter dirt, and the shampoo bowl grime was too much for me.